Okay. After the tragedy of Nadav and Avihu, so you get the next scene is what?
They pull the bodies out.
Right, they take out the bodies, and then you have this back and forth with Aaron, correct? Where Aaron doesn't do
different,
right? Not everything, right? He doesn't do everything in the process of the Miluim, and he gets into a bit of a disagreement with Moshe about it. But in the end, Moshe agrees that he was correct in what he did. And then you get the prohibition against
unkempt hair in the mikdash.
And working in the Beit HaMikdash drunk,
and with
or having had something to drink. Right, and then you have the end of the Miluim, and then you get the halfway point of the Torah, right? In Chamishi, Darosh Darash, not Drash Drash, it's Darosh Darash.
The letters.
I was like, you know the Gemara where it's just Dalad Rei Shin, but in the pasuk it's Vetzirach Hatat Darosh Darash Moshe V'hinei Soraf. Right, now this is the middle of that anger story, right, where Moshe gets angry at him, is where that appears. Correct. And then we transition into Kashrut. So good. Why do we transition into Kashrut here?
Because we're trying to separate from the Chol and the Kodesh here too.
So that's what part of it. Yes.
That's what the pasuk said. What? The same lashon, I thought both.
Oh no, I think that's definitely. Maybe not just part of it, right? That seems to be the central part of it, right? Which is that, yes, the Kohanim are tasked with being lahavdil bein hakodesh uvein hachol, right? Vein hatamei vein hatahor, and kashrut is described, right? Not the way anyone uses it colloquially, right? Because as came up again this morning, everyone colloquially, for some reason, says if something is not kosher, what do they say it is? Treif. Great, that's wonderful for them, right? Treif refers to specifically
animal that died in 12 months.
An animal that has one of the Yud Ches Simonei Tarfus, which Chazal determined that the animal will die within 12 months. Though, as the Rambam notes, it's halach Moshe Sinai, and therefore, theoretically, you could have a different mum which would die in 12 months and not be considered a treifa, and you could have one of the animals with one of the Simonei Tarfus who will not die within 12 months and will still be called a treifa. Right, because the Rambam rules that this is one of the cases where, despite the fact that it sort of seems like halacha is based on science, right, it's actually not. It's based on Masera, right? It's just like an approximation of the reason for it. But actually, these Simonei Tarfus are halacha Moshe Misinai. That's treif, right? That is a treifa. A nevela is an animal that dies without shechita, which either means it was shechted badly, or it was, or died. Right? It doesn't have to be killed in any way; it can just die, right? You know, things die. So that happens.
If a treifa dies of its injuries, that's still treifa, or is that nevela?
If an animal,
a treifa who dies of its injury,
is a treifa and a nevela.
It's both.
Correct.
Oh, that's fun.
Correct. Except ein etzrachal lister, so treifa came first, right? But like theoretically, descriptively, it is treifa and nevela. Halachically, right? Maybe not because of etzrachal lister.
It's like a pig.
So now we get to our parsha, and this is why, back to Eli's point, in Chumash, it is a behemat tme'ah, right? Non-kosher animals, non-kosher species are tme'ot, and kosher species are tahor, right? And yes, that is the simplest pshat as to why Shmini ends up where, right? Why Kashrut ends up in Shmini, because the Kohanim are tasked with the discerning between tameh and tahor. So once we're talking about discerning between Tameh and Tahor, we get the halachot of Kashrut, which is interesting, because if I'd asked you in a vacuum, does Kashrut have anything to do with the Kohanim?
I would have said no.
You would have said not per se, right? Except, look at the clues that we have. So, besides the fact that it's smack in the middle of laws related to the Kohanim, not only is it smack in the middle, it is preceded by the halacha, right, which is said in the context of not entering the mikdash while intoxicated, inebriated, right, that they have to be lahavdil, bein hakodesh, bein hachol, bein hatamei, bein tahor. But what is it followed by? Tazria Mitzera, which is, again, cases where the Kohanim are distinguishing between Tameh and Tahor, meaning this is smack in the middle. It's not like, you can't say this is a parenthetical comment, right? This is clearly thematically linked to both what precedes it and what comes after it, and on both sides, those are clearly Kohanic things, right? So, it's a bit strange that Kashrut ends up here. Besides for that, if you open up Perek Yud Aleph, in a pasuk you probably skip, right? Because, it's one of those that's not very thematically important. Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe ve'al Aaron lemor, Aleihem, but you get Aaron, right? This is one of those where Moshe gets it, and as Rashi says, Moshe amar sheyomar laharon lemor aleihem asher sheyomar le'elazar v'tamar, right? Moshe told Aaron to tell Elazar v'tamar, right? Meaning, clearly this instruction isn't a straight Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor. The Kohanim are integrated into the very instruction of it, which makes sense contextually because, again, this is the context of the Kohanim being Mavdil Ben HaTamei Ben HaTahor. Now the Ramban, as we saw at the beginning of the Sefer, is bothered by this. Remember at the beginning, why is Torah Kohanim, if half the Sefer is not about it? And do you remember what the Ramban said thematically there?
Because you can only offer kosher animals on the Mizbeach.
So he said, his basic approach was, everything really is about the Kohanim, and there are some things that are parenthetical. So he says, HaMitzvot re'parshat eila nohagot b'Yisrael v'Kohanim, aval inyanam mirubeh b'Kohanim. Yeah. So there are some things that are not about the Kohanim. But mostly about the Kohanim. Because they have to be worried about touching tamei things and the implications for the Mikdash. And if the Jews mess up in these halachot, they'll have to bring a karban, and then the Kohanim will have to take care of that. But then he adds why this is related, and he says, wait a second, what does it mean that the Kohanim have to be lahavdil ben atamei ben atahor? So part of it obviously means that they actually create tumah, like in sarad and things like that. But there's a key word in that parsha, which Chazal understand in a very specific way, lehorot. What is lehorot? To teach, or the way Chazal understand it, to paskin. Right, so Ramban says, wait a second, no, this actually is Kohanic related. Why? Because Kohanim aren't only priests in the Mikdash, they're also educators, right? They're also poskim. And therefore he says, he named Tzrichim lahorot Yisrael tamei v'atar shizaru bahem, al kein hayad dibur bazam Moshe v'Aaron shneihem. So that's why this ends up here. Because, yes, this is not a Kohanic law, but the Kohanim are also educators. So once you're talking about their role as distinguishing between Tumah and Tahara, that's not just the Tumah and Tahara that they create or are responsible for in the Mikdash, it's also the Tumah and Tahara that they educate the Jewish people about, explaining why the Parsha begins with not Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor, but Vaydaber Hashem Moshe vel Aaron lemor aleihem. Right, where Aaron is part of the process. Now, Rashi says that Moshe was responsible for telling the Jewish people. But he says that Aaron tells his children. But what the Ramban notes in Pshat and Rashi sort of gets to the pasuk bet is that therefore Aaron is part of the process of education. In this case, he's actually teaching the Jewish people about the laws of Kashrut. Now, what does all of this tell you about Kashrut, right? Or tell you about Vayikra? And this is something we talked about at the beginning, right? But now it becomes more evident as you watch how the integration happens, which is that Vayikra isn't just about, right? What?
Mikdash.
Yeah, it isn't just about Mikdash, right? It's about right. So again, we suggest Rav David Tzvi Hoffman's formulation, which is that Vayikra is also about the Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh. But even if you want to be like the Ramban, and now you see a qualification to the Ramban, even if you think that Vayikra really is Torah Kohanim, meaning the Kohanim Mamash,
It's a broad
right?
Kohanim.
Correct. The Ramban hasn't, right, he didn't say this in the introduction, but now you get a fuller picture of the Ramban's theory of Vayikra, which is, yes, it's about the Kohanim, but it's not the Kohanim in the Mikdash. It's the Kohanim in all their roles, of which many are in their Mikdash, and some of them are educational, which is sort of a backdoor way of getting to the same point as David Tzvi Hoffman, right? Which is that Vayikra isn't only about the Kohanim, it's about Yisrael and how the Kohanim influence Yisrael in their role in the Mikdash, but also in their role that emanates beyond the Mikdash. So David Tzvi Hoffman just says it straight, right? That Vayikra is about educating Kohanim, meaning Kohanim, and Kohanim meaning Yisrael. The Ramban now in the Parsha on Kashrut brings it in back to the back door, and he says, no, it really is about the Kohanim, but it really is, in the end of the day, also about Yisrael, because the Kohanim aren't only the functionaries in the Mishkan, they're also the educators. Hence, the lessons that the Kohanim have for themselves in the Mikdash, they have to translate in different ways for Yisrael, Michutz LaMishkan. And therefore, Kashrut becomes one of the key proofs that even according to the Ramban, and this is what, again, he didn't say this in the introduction, but from this comment that he makes in the Kashrut section, you realize what he didn't say there, which is that part of the story of Vayikra, even if it is about the Kohanim, isn't the Kohanim as their function as functionaries in the Mishkan, but is in their role in inspiring the Jewish people, right? And therefore it is a more expansive book, even if it really is about the Kohanim, qua Kohanim, right? It's still about Yisrael in the end of the day. Right? And that's what Kashrut is evidence of. And again, thematically, if you follow the book and you realize that Vayikra is mamish enveloped in the middle of Kohanic laws, right? That becomes all the more clear, right? That there is a purposeful blurring of these lines, right? That there aren't Mikdash laws which are totally divorced from outside Mikdash laws, right? That there are Mikdash laws and there are outside Mikdash laws, and there is meant to be an influence and interaction between them. And Kashrut, again, is a classic example of that. Okay.